Ooh, prehistoric Europe. Long before the medieval kingdoms, the empires of the age of gunpowder, or the invention of communism, was a world where hunting and gathering were the only means of survival for small groups of humans until one legendary group arrived, bringing with them agriculture and some of the most important civilizational practices to Europe.
The Indo-Europeans, right?
No, not the Indo-Europeans. We've got a bit of a problem with the Proto-Indo-Europeans. They tend to hog all the spotlight in Eurasian prehistory, because for many, claiming descent from the stereotypical Aryans gives them some petty external validation. In reality, it was the Anatolian farmers who changed things around. They reshaped the landscape and paved the way for Europe to become the cultural continent we know today. So, get ready to hear about the first proto-civilizations of Europe, maybe the most fascinating prehistory I could possibly tell you about. And the guy who you spoke is Hantili the Hittite. He's an original character of the channel and he will be with us in the following videos. And the first chapter in this story is the arrival of the Anatolian farmers to the European continent. These pioneers didn't just bring seeds and domesticated animals, they brought multiple things: pottery, weaving, permanent houses, and sedentary life itself. But these Anatolians didn't appear out of thin air. Their roots go back all the way to the Fertile Crescent, 12,000 years ago. I promise I won't make this long. When the Natufians of the Levant began experimenting with the gathering of grains, they developed techniques for grain storage, grinding, and animal management, and discovered the single most important human-made product in history:
Beer?
Exactly, you nailed it this time. We all know that human progress is just a massive conspiracy to get us drunk, and I'm not complaining about it. Many Natufian descendants migrated north, mixing with proto-farmers of northern Mesopotamia and the hunter-gatherers of Anatolia. By around 7000 BC, the Anatolian farmers had taken shape. As they refined Natufian techniques, they adopted agriculture, which wasn't just planting seeds, but rather a sophisticated and hard commitment to the land, involving planting, crop rotation, gathering, animal keeping, and the construction of permanent structures. These led to some of the first permanent villages in human history, including Çatalhöyük, often called the first city of humanity. This lifestyle shift, called the Neolithic Revolution, changed humanity forever. From Anatolia, they began migrating into the Balkans, bringing wheat, barley, lentils, and domesticated animals such as goats, sheep, and cattle. They introduced village life to the continent, slowly forming a network of loosely connected cultures we now call the Old Europe. Let's go south. In Thessaly, Greece, we find Sesklo, one of the earliest well-documented agricultural settlements in Europe. Dating back to 6800 BC, their specific rectangular houses, ovens, painted pottery, and community planning clearly reflect this Anatolian heritage, being reminiscent of Çatalhöyük itself. Sesklo's pottery shows geometric patterns and stylized human figures, probably functional, but also ritual in nature. Nearby, the site of Dimini emerged 2 millennia later, with complex architecture and early urban planning, defined streets, plazas, and communal spaces, showing a growing sense of cooperation and social coordination. Because agriculture, animal domestication, and long-term settlement made life far more communal than individual, leading to the foundations of what will one day become the Greek civilization. Now we go to the north, around 6300 BC, in the Danube gorges of Serbia, we find Lepenski Vir, a fascinating transitional site where local hunter-gatherers began absorbing elements of farming culture arriving from the south, from places like Sesklo itself. Its trapezoidal stone houses, among the first permanent buildings in Europe outside of the southern Balkans, mark humanity's growing desire to settle down. Its bizarre fish-human sculptures with mysterious faces and bodies show that spirituality and art remain central. Fish bones, shells, and architectural remains remains suggest a mixed diet of farming and fishing, hence their peculiar appreciation of fish. Genetically, Lepenski's population was a blend of European hunter-gatherers and Anatolian farmers, almost half and half, the first significant biological and cultural contact between two different worlds. Between 5700 and 4500 BC, a great culture flourished along the Serbian Danube, the Vinca, named after its largest and best known site near Belgrade, Serbia's capital. Their settlements were dense, streets, plazas and homes were carefully planned, showing a high level of social organization. The Vinca were a balanced mix of Anatolian farmers and local hunter-gatherers, a blend that fostered both technological and cultural innovation. Their diet combined advanced Anatolian farming with river fishing, local hunting, and animal husbandry, a diverse and sustainable way of life. The men averaged 1.70 meters tall, the women 1.61, a bit taller than most early European farmer groups, apparently due to their diet. Contrary to what some might think, many Vinca settlements were well defended, equipped with obsidian knives, polished axes, spears, bows and arrows, everything you need to keep invaders out. So no, they weren't some peaceful flower-loving society. Just the average decent community you wouldn't want to mess with without a plan. Something to appreciate about the Vinca is their art and symbolism. Clay figurines, decorative items, and painted pottery with geometric and human designs, showing that they valued both function and expression, perhaps even religious symbolism. And their most mysterious feature is the Vinca proto-writing system. The oldest examples related to it are the Tartaria tablets around 5000 BC, which show engraved symbols on clay, bone and stone, systematically repeated across what is now Serbia, Bosnia, Hungary, Romania and Bulgaria. It doesn't seem to represent a full phonetic language like Sumerian cuneiform, but the symbols suggest record keeping, possibly for accounting, rituals, or ownership. It wasn't a proper writing system yet, but still several steps ahead of nearly every other prehistoric society of their time.
Wait, Jan, that would make them into a civilization, right?
Good question. I love that question. Some settlements like that of Vinca Beloverdo shows advanced social coordination, which is a key hallmark of civilization. The presence of Chalcolithic tools made of stone and copper implies metallurgy and technological specialization within their society. However, despite their impressive achievements, the Vinca did not develop a full writing system or centralized state structures. There is no evidence of bureaucratic administration, monumental architecture, organized armies, or clear social hierarchy, traits that mark the shift from an advanced society to a fully fledged civilization, like Sumer or the Indus Valley civilization, for example, at least according to most scholars, the impartial ones anyway, without a Eurocentric bias. Their proto-writing influenced some others of all Europe, but it remained isolated, and it was abandoned around 3500 BC, and although some of their settlements were quite big, reaching about 2500 to 3000 inhabitants, larger than contemporary Proto-Uruk or many early Sumerian towns, they never achieved the density or political hierarchy that Sumer would reach a millennium and a half later. Calling the Vinca a proto-civilization is not far-fetched at all, especially if your definition for it is an almost full civilization. They had urban development, complex economy and symbolic record-keeping, essential elements that hint at how close they were to taking that final leap towards a full writing system and political centralization. Though they didn't. Their prosperity faded after 4500 BC due to crises and slow migrations to other places, but in many ways, the Vinca were an advanced experiment of humanity, a silent prelude to the great civilizations that will emerge a millennium later in Mesopotamia and Egypt. So most certainly, the Vinca was the first proto-civilization in human history. And it was in Europe.
And what about Mehergar or Ubaid?
No, they both reached that level later. By 4800 to 4500 BC, Mergar was still an agricultural settlement with metallurgy, and the Ubaid had temples and social hierarchy, yeah, but they lacked the proto-writing, scale, and specialized economy that the Vinca did have. Still, all of them were fascinating and advanced human cultures. Why do we have to carve everything we do? Like our neighbors from the north? Not a symbol in sight, just people living in the moment.
You don't get it. If we don't carve it, thousands of years from now, no one will know about the great things we did.
And how the hell are they supposed to know what our symbols even mean?
You're quite right.
Between 4800 and 3000 BC, the Cucuteni-Trypillia culture dominated Eastern Europe, covering much of what is now Romania, Moldova, and Ukraine. Their settlements weren't just pretty big, they were also surprisingly well planned for their time. Organized concentric circles, streets and communal plazas, beautifully painted houses, it all showed a strong sense of social organization and aesthetic awareness. Some villages reached populations of 15 to 20,000 people, making them the largest settlements in the world at the time. These people had mostly Anatolian ancestry, around 70%, with a gradual increase of local hunter-gatherer DNA, likely the result of continuous interaction and cultural fusion. Daily life involved ceramic manufacturing, weaving, metallurgy, and food storage in specialized structures, and just like the Vinca, they also had tools that could very well be used for self-defense. The art of Cucuteni-Trypillia is astonishing. Their painted pottery shows intricate geometric patterns, human shapes, spirals, knots, symmetrical designs, all suggesting a society that valued collective identity, maybe tied to fertility or harvest rituals. The attention to beauty and symmetry doubles down on the fact that they valued both functionality and beauty. These same spiral, knot, and symmetry motifs will later reappear across the old European agricultural sites, and even among later Germanic, Celtic and Nordic peoples. While there is no direct evidence of descent from the Cucuteni art style, they probably at least shared a common ancestor. Also the swastikas, which weren't exclusively property of the National Socialist Party, they also show up in many other European cultures, but also all around the world. Asia, Middle East, Africa, they are most likely a natural expression of the human sense of beauty. Toward the end of the culture, contact begins with the steppe hunters, not the Yamnaya, but the proto-Indo-Europeans of the Serenyi stock. Their influence was still limited at the time, but it was a prelude to major genetic and cultural changes to come. Finally, the Yamnaya migrations, together with an economic and climatic crisis around 3000 BC, brought about the decline of the Cucuteni-Trypillia and many other great cultures of all Europe. And I'll have to say this again, the Yamnaya weren't the violent barbaric conquerors that many like to imagine, because they're often portrayed as this unstoppable horde charging through Europe and burning everything in their path like the Huns or the Mongols did. But in reality, violent contact with the early European farmers was actually relatively rare. Most of the evidence points at a gradual migration, cultural exchange, and assimilation. Now about the whole "they were strong because they drank milk" thing, well, sort of, but not quite. They did rely heavily on milk, yes, but not because it made them superhuman, but rather because the steppe's harsh climate made agriculture nearly impossible. Their soils were poor, rainfall was unpredictable, and their farming technologies were extremely primitive compared to those of the farmers in the Balkans or Anatolia. So they turned to what they did best, herding animals and then learning how to digest milk as adults, which only gave them a real advantage in comparison to the Eastern hunter-gatherers. And of course there's that famous myth that the Yamnaya arrived, stole the women of the farmers, and wiped out the men. Now, the genetic evidence does show a bit of a male bias in the early waves, more step Y chromosomes replacing those of Neolithic farmers. So early on, it's true that Yamnaya men traveled to the west alone, without the women, and mixed more with farmer women than the other way around, cause the Yamnaya women didn't arrive in the first waves. But that's of course only the beginning of the story. As migrations continued, later waves show a more balanced pattern, suggesting that the two populations gradually merged, both genetically and culturally. It wasn't conquest, it was just a regular integration. Families were forming, cultures were mixing, and Europe was changing forever in a rather peaceful way. Most of the Neolithic DNA in the areas of contact has a similar amount of male and female Neolithic and also Yamnaya ancestry. So in reality, for every Neolithic woman that a Yamnaya man took, a Neolithic man took on average a Yamnaya wife. In the end, it seems less like an invasion and more like a great migration like any other, don't you think? But life in the Cucuteni-Trypillia cities was an astounding demonstration of human cooperation. People working together in the fields, tending animals, crafting, performing communal rituals, all pointing to complex social organization. Their advanced villages, art and life show that the Cucuteni-Trypillia weren't just trying to survive at this point, but also to create and enjoy a beautiful world. Between 4600 and 4200 BC, on the Bulgarian Black Sea coast, the Varna culture flourished, famous for being the first evidence of clear social inequality in Europe and also the earliest wearing of gold, not only in the continent, but in the entire world. The Varna graves were filled with gold, copper, and ritual objects, which means accumulation of wealth, social roles, and hierarchy. Varna proves that Europeans could develop a complex society, social stratification, and even maintain long-distance trade before formal writing appeared. Their population was predominantly Anatolian, mixed with local hunter-gatherers, though the later arrival of Proto-Indo-Europeans will change things a little bit. The art and the funerary objects of the Varna reflect a deep spiritual belief and a strong identity. Wealth and status became visible, marking the first European elites in prehistory. And although all Europe has often been described as matriarchal, the evidence instead points to egalitarian societies without any gender hierarchies, at least no clear ones. Women were buried with precious or prestigious items like the men, and appeared to have participated in nearly all community roles. Then came the Yamnaya migrations, who brought a culture with a stronger military ethos, together with population growth, and of course, an inevitable competition for resources. So territorial conflicts became a significant part of European life, and since women weren't generally forced into warfare, men began accumulating more resources, especially from bounty, gradually creating the gender gap that persisted in most of Europe for millennia. The story of the Anatolians in prehistoric Europe shows how the continent learned to tame the land, organize itself, and even build cities, long before the first recorded civilizations even existed. Sesklo showed an early success. Lepenski Vera a period of transition. The Vinca were very keen on becoming a full-blown civilization. The Cucuteni-Trypillia built villages that still look massive by modern standards, and the Varna, as if that weren't enough, even developed social hierarchy and bling in 4600 BC. The Neolithic farmers, the descendants of the Anatolians, played a fundamental role in England's prehistory. They built many of the famous megalithic monuments, especially Stonehenge, showing a very advanced astronomical knowledge for their time. And genetically, their legacy lives on. According to studies like the one you see on screen, modern English people retain between 37 and 40% of Neolithic farmer DNA, coming from all of their migration. civilizations, including the later ones, the Belbicas, who were half Neolithic in DNA, then the Celts were about 40% Neolithic, the Anglo-Saxons were also 40% Neolithic, the Romans were about 70%, etc. And let's not forget modern Turkey, Anatolia itself. Even today, contrary to popular belief, most of their DNA is not Turkic, but still 60 to 70% Neolithic Farmer. What you're seeing on screen now is a Turkish school from the 1990s. Notice how their facial features aren't very different from Greeks, Italians, Spaniards, Latin Americans, or even some British. They all share that familiar look. From Anatolia through all Europe, across the Mediterranean, and even reaching Britain, the echo of the parents of Europe. Because their legacy is immense. Even today, the Neolithic farmers remain the single greatest genetic contributor to modern Europeans, especially in the southern half of the continent. It's believed that the Basque language might preserve echoes of how those ancient Anatolians once spoke, but that's a debated topic deserving of another video. And if you're wondering who are the most similar to them today, at least physically, well, beyond the Greeks, Tuscans and Spaniards, all of whom are over 50% Neolithic in ancestry, the answer is the Sardinians. They have preserved about 90% of that ancient DNA, and although physical traits evolve, they've also kept prehistoric cultural traditions. Their songs and throat-style singing, similar to Mongolian overtone chants, carry an echo from a time when Egypt hadn't yet risen, Sumer hadn't yet carved a tablet, and the Yamnaya haven't yet roamed the steppe. And now, if you want to pay any respects to the ancestors of Europe, then you only need to do one thing. Listen silently to the music of those who resemble them the most today.
Ballo,